Well, hello, everyone. And for those of you who are not from here, welcome to Phoenix. We tried to keep it in the 60s for you, but our best efforts didn't work. My name is Susan Sly. I'm the founder and CEO of the Pause Technologies. We are focused on using agentic and generative AI to help the millions of women in the United States and billion globally navigate perimenopause and menopause. I'm a second-time AI founder. In my previous company, we did the largest deployment of computer vision at scale here in the United States. And I'm originally from Canada, but I will not say A. So before I introduce my panelists, I want to share some statistics with all of you. 61% of organizations consider AI essential to their strategy, and that comes from IBM and the Global AI Adoption Index. Only 34% have successfully scaled AI initiatives, according to McKinsey. How many of you have scaled AI by a show of hands? Okay, not very many. How many of you would like to scale AI? Yes. And how many of you would not put up your hand no matter what I said to you? Oh, thank you for the honesty. I do appreciate that. So today our panel is going to talk about cross-sector innovation. And the goal of the panelists and myself is so that you leave with tangible insights on how you can scale AI. And we're at a very interesting time in artificial intelligence. There's been the hype cycle. Now we're seeing greater AI adoption, but at enterprise, there are a lot of barriers, whether it's governance, ethics, or different factions within an organization who can't seem to come together to be able to scale the AI. So we're going to talk about all of these things. We will talk about some potentially interesting areas of opportunity. So the first panelist is leading IBM's consulting services across North and South America, and she has spent over 2 decades helping Fortune 100 clients apply emerging technologies, especially AI and hybrid cloud, to solve high-stakes business and societal problems. She is a vocal advocate for ethical AI and a trusted partner to some of the world's most complex organizations. Kelly Chambliss, and she is here from Chicago, so she flew to our amazing city, and we'll get to know Kelly in just a minute. The second guest is he's leading CGI's global strategy in health and life sciences, and he's advising governments and private sector healthcare organizations on how to use AI to improve clinical workflows, population health, and research efficiency. His work is focused on making AI not just innovative, but implementable, especially where lives are on the line. And he hails from Toronto, my hometown, and we have Ben Goldberg. And my last guest is the founder and CEO of qBotica, which is a Phoenix-based intelligent automation company. His focus is on hyperautomation and the integration of AI and RPA across back-office operations, compliance, and digital transformation. He has deep expertise in tuning inefficiencies into intelligent workflows. And Mahesh Vinayagam, Les, thank you, and welcome. So please give them a massive round of applause. So I always like to start with a fun fact. Kelly, you were a D1 volleyball player, which is hardcore. So being an athlete, and I was a former professional athlete, what aspect of that level of sport have you brought into your work ethic? Because I know you are known for being absolutely driven and tenacious.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I thought you were going to say it's hard to believe because you're not very tall. But I was a setter. Some of you might have guessed libero, but there is a spot for those of us who aren't 6 feet plus on the volleyball court. When I heard that question, Susan, first thing that came to mind is probably this kind of never give up attitude. No, in volleyball, no matter where the ball went, I was diving after it, whether it was into the stands, crashing into other players, just kind of going after everything and kind of refusing to give up on anything, which is so important to the world, in the world of business and especially technology. The other thing, though, that I would highlight is just teamwork and the power of teamwork and people coming together with a common goal, and how much more can be accomplished and how much better we make each other when we come together as a united team.
So we now have the vision of Kelly diving into the stands at IBM, right, to be able to bring together the innovation. Thank you, Kelly, for that. So Ben, we've had some different conversations, both being Canadian, but you are an avid F1 fan. I mean, hardcore, Melbourne, UK, Montreal, so many. So what is the bucket list F1?
It's the best bucket list because there's just so many options out there. But Monaco is definitely one of them. That's the peak because it is truly the most established and esteemed of the races. So that would be the bucket list one. But there's again so many to tackle around the world. I'm looking forward to ticking them off the list.
So if anyone has client tickets to Monaco, let Ben know.
That's right.
So Mahesh, how many of you play pickleball? Anyone? Okay, I've never played pickleball in my life. And as an angel investor, I have 7 startups in my portfolio. 1 pivoted to pickleball. I still haven't played. So not, but Mahesh, you were running a fever of 103 and you were supposed to be in a pickleball tournament and you're like, no, I'm going to play anyway, which is absolutely insane. And you end up winning. So for those people who've never played pickleball, why pickleball?
Okay, yeah. I wouldn't actually recommend others do it, but I had to, for the sake of my partner, to win that tournament. Yeah, so, why would someone play? That's the question here. I think it's for our ages, and it's all skills. And one of the fun thing is, like, you see pickleball in America, it's in every corner, like every park has it, so it's a good social aspect to it, right? So whatever age that you are in, even if you just want to get out or meet someone, that's a great place to be, I would say.
Well, you're almost tempting me to try it, but I might wait until after it's not going to be 100 degrees here in Phoenix. And the reason I ask these questions is because there is always a human behind any AI scaling. And that's the thing we have to remember if you're taking notes, is that whatever we are going to do when it comes to deploying AI across sectors, that we have to bring that human aspect in and come to the table first and foremost as human beings before we start to talk about the technology. But let's jump in. So, Kelly, you are working across highly regulated sectors, finance, government, healthcare. And where are you seeing AI create operational transformation, and what is blocking the scaling?
Good question, Susan. So I'll maybe start with the second half of that question, which is the blockers, constraints, because when you ask the question to the audience about how many are using AI at scale, there weren't very many hands that went up, and that's because there are some challenges and constraints in front of us all as it relates to really getting the full value from the technology. And probably technology that gives us the ability to unlock value at a level that none of us have ever seen in our career. So it's not a technical limitation today. There are some other constraints and challenges. Kind of the first couple that come to mind are, I'll just say, data readiness. And it's not just having the data, but having it in a trusted, and to your point around regulated industries, compliant, and being able to use that data for machine learning and for AI. So data readiness is a big challenge. Just IT and application landscape complexity is a big challenge. And think about it, AI itself will generate additional applications. Probably, I think it's been estimated 1 billion in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's adding to the complexity of the environment, and then the skills required to navigate that complexity and to be able to harness the full power of the data. And then last but not least, probably the greatest challenge, I think, is skills and cultural change and incentives and changing the behavior of really millions of people in various roles across every organization, right? It's a really big cultural shift and just new ways of working, and incenting, motivating everybody to leverage this technology can be a big challenge and a big constraint, and something that requires a lot of focus. Having said all of that, there are areas where real value is being realized at scale from AI today. A few examples are application development, just building applications and IT operations, supporting some of the complexity that I described. So in the IT space, a lot of automation and AI driving real productivity and efficiency. The second one I would say is security, right? Security is at the top of every board and CEO's things to worry about list, right? And AI is doing amazing things in terms of detecting, preventing security breaches before they happen. Those advancements will continue. And then last but not least, on the business process side, we're seeing a lot of scale value being added in the employee and customer service space. So we have clients, one example is Elevance Health, that they handled 10 million customer inquiries digitally, and it not only drove productivity, cost savings, efficiency, but higher customer sat. So anything around employee and customer service, we're seeing real impact at scale.
It's interesting when you talk about that, because I think about how much AI agents have evolved, especially in customer service, and seeing companies, large enterprise companies, making those shifts, and the technology getting better and better, and the models getting better and better, because they're looking at the training on that data and really applying it. And then I think, how many of you have had a really bad AI customer service experience? Yeah, right? Like, that's almost all of us. And so I think that as we go and grow in the near future, and with compute and operational efficiency, we're going to begin to see those agents get so much better. So, which, thank goodness, that's all I have to say about that. Ben, so AI is really rapidly evolving in the healthcare space, and adoption is not even. And so what are some of the breakthrough use cases that you're seeing today, and how are you helping your clients, which include public and private sector, overcome the adoption risk that they perceive?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's something that's innate to healthcare. It happens to be a very risk-averse industry. And so when you have a risk-averse industry trying to introduce emerging technologies, there's some apprehension around it, which is going to be natural. And you have to prove out those case studies to really grow the momentum and the adoption behind it. Actually, to the point about AI tending to be more baked in with a lot of processes these days too. Often it's something that's underlying a lot of technologies that are being leveraged to date. But there's sort of two streams that we're really finding in terms of AI adoption. Some of the safer, dare I say, implementations are more on those foundational administrative tasks. So helping to modernize the way that you're interacting with your administrative systems and optimizing operations and pieces like that. Huge value in it. A little bit more of a trepidation around getting into things that lead to more clinical decision making. There's obviously, again, that apprehension around introducing technologies that are going to have that clinical impact. You have to tread very lightly when you're coming across that. But with that being said, there's phenomenal case studies that we're doing around the world, which I'll just bring up a couple. Our team in Finland have a really mature portfolio there and relationship with the health delivery sector. And we've introduced early detection for brain bleeding, so an AI brain analysis platform there, which in itself is providing access and visibility to potential brain hemorrhaging at a very, very early stage and helping to save lives in that respect. You look at technologies around AI Scribe, which I think has been one of the most impactful instances across healthcare. You've got physicians who would, you interact with your primary care provider, and they're sitting there taking notes on their computer while you're having a conversation about your health and well-being. You're hoping that they capture everything accurately. And then towards the tail end of the day, there's that extra 3 or 4 hour process that happens where your physician's then going through those notes, summarizing those notes, populating them into the patient summary, and it's really leading to that physician burnout. AI Scribe is a platform that can record that interaction, capture all of the details, funnel it into the patient summary, and your doctor gets to have a true one-on-one conversation the way things are meant to be. So there's some really phenomenal case studies that are out there.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Ben, about AI Scribe, because one of the things we're seeing with AI too is improved sentiment analysis. When I started really deploying AI at scale almost 7 years ago, sentiment analysis was very primal, for the lack of a better word, but now we're seeing better sentiment analysis, especially from writing. The Gen AI models have done that, because it's not so much the problem, and we were studying at MIT these different use cases where different physicians are going to have different perceptions of what is happening with the patient, and that goes into the EMR. And there's also going to be bias, right? And so the wonderful thing about AI, if the model is trained correctly, that it can detect sentiment, it can reduce the bias and have better patient outcomes. So great example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of these things are compounding into a true transformation in an industry that's fundamentally ripe for disruption. That's, I think, why there's so many impacts that can happen with this technology, because, again, it's an industry that needs this kind of change.
Yes, and as a sidebar, since I'm working in women's health, from what Kelly said with data and what Ben is talking about, just to give some perspective, if you don't know, here in the United States, just this is one fact, that heart disease kills more women than all the top 5 cancers combined. Yet 70% of the data set that is being used for those recommendations came from middle-aged white men. So the models that are being built are not providing accurate ways for women to actually navigate heart disease, right? So we have to Kelly's point, improve the data sources, data quality, improve the models, and what Ben is doing and in his work to be able to use these models to create better outcomes. So Mahesh, you have the fun job of moving clients from legacy processes, some of which are very, very old, to intelligent automation using AI. So what are some of the patterns you're seeing in terms of cross-sector readiness? I'm very curious about that. And where are you seeing AI deliver immediate impact?
Great question, Susan. So if you look at the overall pattern of how companies are adopting AI and the companies and the clients that we help over the last decade, right? So I'd actually put them into 3 classes. Obviously, there are early adopters, then you have the late movers, then you have the laggards, right? So coming to the early adopters, so they were like at the start of the century, Y2K obviously shifted the whole technology sector to adopt a lot of outsourcing, so they were able to kind of really get the cost arbitrage through that. So the innovation was not pretty much around innovating in terms of the delivery of service or how they build systems, but how they actually move them off. Then after a decade of that, the cost pressures came in. Obviously, that's no longer the cost arbitrage that they needed. Obviously, they needed to find more ways to deliver services, repeatable service of high quality and all that stuff. And then they kind of started to adopt automation. These early movers saw that, okay, automation is a great opportunities. So they kind of really latched onto it and automated many of the menial tasks, if you will, right? So the data entry stuff, a lot of labor-intensive tasks, those automations really went fast. They were like really creating hundreds of processes or bots that were doing those efficiency gains for them. Then come like 2018, 2019, right? It's all the technology cycle, right? So then they're seeing that they're not really getting that output, that level of efficiency, because they've actually done most of it. They were reaching a point of like, where do I go for other opportunities? Then coming to the late movers, who probably started around the 2015s. So the technology was pretty evolved from an automation perspective. There was some element of AI, like you talked about. The intent engines were there, some level of machine learning, NLP was starting up. Chatbots were right there. Some mature technology, the computer vision, all of that kind of really came in. So they were like jumping onto the opportunity. Yes, I have the technology. But again, they hit a dead end as well when these processes that they were trying to automate, they needed a lot of judgment, a lot more skill than just typical rules-based stuff we're able to automate, right? So that's where they got stopped. And then the laggards, they were like, obviously, they were like wondering what to do, right? They were like regardless of size, scale, and type of sector, there were laggards across the board, right? So construction companies, some government agencies, some like banks or some credit unions, they were like, because they were not really incentivized to get to that path, they got kind of really, they were there. But each one of those 3 type of adopters, they're all coming to a unified with this level of AI technology availability right now, right? So I think it's fantastic. I think the journeys, all these, wherever they are in their stage of adoption, their journeys are converging. And I think that is the beauty. And regardless of the sector, regardless of their adoption cycle, I think AI and Gen AI and agentic AI that we talked about and the AI agents are giving them that lifeline, that ability to really go fast, whether they got stuck, whether they didn't start, or wherever they are in their journey. I think they can move forward.
Well, and thinking about legacy systems, right? When you look at different types of AI, and I know for some people in the audience, you're thinking AI as one catchment, but there are many different types of AI, many different use cases. Sometimes legacy systems can be very directly related to hardware legacy. So in my past life, the kind of security cameras, or if there's existing edge hardware, and it can be really tough for large organizations to look at the cost to update their systems. And so I've seen where, for example, one large, I won't say who it is, retailer said, we have legacy edge compute, we have legacy GPUs. To anyone who is filling out the RFP, any of those ISVs, they had to be able to operate on legacy systems because they were demanding, if you want to do business with us, this is the choice you have. When we look at AI in the cloud, of course, it's more scalable. And that leads me to the big question, because a lot of discussion around AI for the last few years has been very theoretical, which is great. But let's get down to brass tacks. Let's talk ROI. And not to hold back. I mean, I think everyone in this room, you've probably seen your portfolio, take a hit the last week. And I didn't even look this morning. As a total aside, I get on the treadmill at the gym in the morning. I couldn't even watch CNBC. I thought, I'm going to just throw up in a bucket beside the treadmill this morning. But the reality is that we are living in a time where it's not 2021 anymore. Money's not cheap. We need to be able to prove ROI if we are going to deploy artificial intelligence. And so that's where I want to get deep really fast. So Kelly, where are you seeing the combination of AI and hybrid cloud really deliver scalable transformation and enhance efficiency?
Yeah, great question. And even 2-3 months ago, companies were focused on driving productivity, driving efficiency, and to your point, even more so today, right? And so I think that will break even more companies faster out of this experimentation, pilot, proof of concept mode and into scale, because we need to see the value from it today. We use ourselves in IBM as what we call client zero. So we do a lot of experimentation, pilots, proof of concepts, like most organizations. But as soon as that business case is strong and the ROI is compelling, we'll implement it at scale. And one of the first use cases that we implemented at scale might surprise some, which is HR. We set off to say there's got to be a better way to handle a lot of what I'll call the transactional side of HR. So people needing, a proof of employment letter, people needing to change, someone who, reporting chains, those kinds of things. They're a little more transactional in nature. And so, to drive productivity, to drive efficiency, we proved out that 90+% of transactions could be handled digitally. And the beautiful thing about it is, not only did it drive productivity and efficiency, but when you look at employee sat ratings on our HR team and function, they went up because people wanted to be able, it's like this empowerment that was given to them to just be able to go out there and truly have what we've been talking about for years in terms of employee self-service. It was real, and so we created this Ask HR bot and agent and just built on it. And now 94+% of transactions are handled through Ask HR. And then the other beautiful thing that came out of it was it freed up all of our HR professionals to do higher value work, to spend time coaching, developing, guiding people's careers, thinking about the skills that are needed out around the corner and helping people build those in advance, and those types of activities that before they'd been bogged down a bit by some of the more administrative transactional activities.
And I love that IBM is looking at the long game for ROI. So when we're looking at ROI, especially for AI implementation, what companies have done is just look at the first part of the curve. So I'll give a real world example. So autonomous checkout. I'm surveying. How many of you use self-checkout when you go to the store? Okay. Almost everyone. So when a company is implementing self-checkout, they might look at, say, the CapEx to do it, and initially it's, it cuts labor, so it goes up like this. What was happening is if they followed the curve out 6 months or longer, the ROI went down because of shrink. And we went through a time here in the United States where people were literally walking out of stores. They were doing something called push-outs, where they'd load up their cart and they'd push, out a significant dollar figure. And so if you took that curve out, it actually lost money for the organization. And so now we're seeing, with different guardrails in place, better AI, humans in the loop, that self-checkout does make sense, but initially it didn't. The same thing with self-driving cars, right? So one thing I would invite you all to think about is take your ROI curves out longer, because sometimes what you're going to see is the ROI does go up, but some implementation, it might go down a little bit before it does increase, and that's just, smart business. So Ben, you have AI models improving public health outcomes and accelerating clinical trials. And it's so interesting when you think about public health versus private sector. So can you give some examples of where it's improving in both private and public?
I disappeared. I'm back. One thing I actually wanted to touch on that Kelly mentioned, which I think is such a great use case as well for ROI, because in my head and in many people's head, when we think of ROI, we think of the reduction of staffing that's going to be a result of introducing this technology. And what I love about your use case there is that it wasn't about finding efficiencies in the workforce in that respect. It was about providing better customer satisfaction, allowing the actual workforce to focus on those high priority pieces. So it's such a great example that really sets the precedent. For clinical trials in public health, there's just so much phenomenal innovation. From a clinical trial perspective, where AI can really play a role is helping to narrow down that group of potential candidates, the patients that can actually qualify and can be shortlisted and addressed in a much quicker respect. There's a lot of innovation that happens there, but I do want to touch on population health and public health, because I find it fascinating. And some of the work we've done with the NHS, we've done work within the BC Ministry of Health as well, is to introduce a model that taps into all these data sources and provides real-time access to them, real-time dashboarding. You could have a minister who is heading to a session, needs to find out information about ambulatory care or about surgical wait times or about vaccine administration, and rather than her reaching out to her support team to gather this information, which could take days or weeks, this is now something that can happen on the fly. And she's able to dial into the system directly to pull that type of information. That in itself is really transformative. And that's just on the surface. I mean, you get into, with access to that data, with the level or the layer of technology on top, what kind of information can you ascertain from it? How can that help you in pandemic prevention? How can that help you in determining pockets of things at a much, much earlier stage? So it's truly transformative.
And my follow-on question, because when I think about especially coming from Ontario, thinking about all of the data that is available, because it isn't gated by, say, different insurance companies or different stakeholders. It's all there. My question for you, I'm just so deeply curious about this, especially with healthcare. Do you feel there's an easier path to creating AI adoption in private or public? What are you seeing right now?
I don't think the path is very straightforward. I think there's, Kelly talked about the data, the governance around that I think is huge. The quality thereof. The governance I think is really that next piece. So access to that data, all the different players that are involved in it, interoperability standards, which is a fundamental underlying theme that we've talked about for decades, and it's being addressed in chunks, but we're talking about systems that don't fundamentally talk to each other. And when they don't, how can you leverage that data? So there's a bunch of different pieces. Ontario in particular, 165 public hospitals. You've got a variety of different agencies that help support healthcare delivery. We talk about province to province, let alone within your community, and trying to, follow up on that patient journey and provide the level of care that we're all aspiring to. So it's not an easy feat. It's achievable, and we are pushing in the right direction. And I really think emerging technologies like AI are going to be the catalyst for that change.
Which is fantastic, and thank you for those examples. So Mahesh, you are looking at different sectors and really thinking about automation plus AI to reduce cost and improve compliance in real time. So where are you seeing some bright spots in the work you're doing right now?
Yeah, I think generally across the board. So when we talk about compliance, right, so in the past, it's all about sampling, right? You wanted to kind of really take a few things and kind of really figure out how you do this. But with the automation, what we were able to do is capture information at a very granular level across the board and with every process, right? So it's kind of, it changed the game. You are able to now, like humans, when they're performing the process, they only recorded a few things. They didn't record everything, right? So with now, from the human execution to autonomous execution, the bots were able to kind of really say what they did and kind of log everything. So now we have the data. Now that the data is here, the AI gives us much more ability to kind of really go through that data. Now think about it, how it's actually evolved, right? And with the add on top, in some sectors, the edge computing the resources, the cost of those kind of really coming down. You can actually put sensors, a lot of things like data collection, like cameras everywhere. This enormous opportunity now being presented to collect that data in various forms, whether it is for pictures, videos, voice and text and emails and documents. All of it is actually presenting great opportunity for the models to kind of go into deeper level of testing or looking and checking information. I think for compliance leaders, this is the greatest opportunity that has been presented to them. They can actually look at it every level possible, and things that were not seen by human eyes, right? Now they are now visible. So I'm very excited about it, right? So it is again industry agnostic, size agnostic. And with what DeepSeek really showed us, right, with the shock as well, that it can be implemented at a very low cost as well, right? The barrier of like, hey, I have to be a very large organization to buy something from IBM, for example. They can just set up a subscription for $25 online to start using some of those technologies, right? So I think I'm very excited about it.
And I love that you mentioned multimodal data input. So when we're thinking about, for those of you who haven't implemented AI yet, the different types of data sources can provide such incredible insight. And going back to, as an example, women's health, so to a full picture of a woman, to be able to use, say, her mammogram and her blood work and her sentiment data from self-reporting, journaling. I mean, there's no end of ways we can paint better pictures, right? As opposed to trying to take the cookie cutter approach. And that's where AI comes in to be precise. Now, there's a lot of learning that can happen between sectors. And what works for one sector could be a catalyst for growth and real scale in another sector. And sometimes it doesn't work. But Kelly, I want to ask you, what can healthcare learn from AI adoption in financial services and vice versa?
This is a fun one because there will be increasing sharing of models, learning patterns across industries over time as AI adoption scales. It's interesting, and you heard me cite a few examples earlier, but most of the scale adoption of AI have been cross-industry use cases to date. So I use an example of HR, there's security, there's IT operations, customer service, like there's procurement, finance, I could go on, but a lot of them are cross-industry functions and processes. There are some great examples in financial services and banking are probably as advanced as any industry because they've been using machine learning to start and now more advanced AI to detect fraud for years, right? And it's now quite sophisticated. And many of you as consumers are getting the messages and they're catching many more transactions, fraudulent transactions than they would have in the past. So when you start thinking about, okay, banks have kind of mastered applying AI to fraud, could that be applied in healthcare to medical billings, claims, and fraud even in the public sector more broadly? And so some of those use cases will start to cross over between financial services and healthcare. You could go the other direction as well when you start thinking about art of the possible, where, and Ben, you've talked about, and your team does work around predictive diagnostics and helping diagnose patients and all of that. If you think about it, that's the health of a person. Could some of those use cases and models and patterns be used to look at the health of an investment portfolio, right? And one of the beautiful things that's advancing now in AI is, and you talked about ROI earlier, it does cost a lot, and that's why it's been hard to break out of experimentation mode, except in some of these cross-industry processes. But now there's more and more smaller models being built for some of these domain industry-specific use cases. So the models being applied for fraud are very specific, and as a result, they don't take up the same compute power to run them. And so you can get ROI faster as well from some of these domain industry-specific models. And then to your point, you'll start to see, does fraud apply to health, from banking apply to healthcare? Does healthcare diagnostics apply to investment portfolios? And, you can really start to think about the possibilities and the power of the technology.
And Kelly, I love that you mentioned that. Many years ago, I was looking at some research on the correlation between physical health and financial health. And this was very much correlative, but very evidence-based research that came out of one university. And that the financial health of the individual, they were looking at that compared with obesity as an example. And I think we're going to learn a lot. And there's always, as we begin to go through cross sectors and as it relates to our end users, the data always tells a story. And our goal is to use AI for good and to be able to help humans live better, longer, healthier, happier lives, right? So I love that you gave those examples. Go ahead, Ben.
I just want to chime in because I think it's a great point. It's about not just the lessons that can be learned cross-industry, but the data that can be leveraged cross-industry, how it informs other industries, and be it social determinants of health, which obviously are a major component of one's well-being, or if it's financial elements or environmental elements. I think it's fascinating.
And that I'm curious about this to piggyback on my last question to you, Ben, because having it, for me, in my perspective, living in the U.S. but being Canadian, I've experienced both healthcare systems. Are you seeing either system learning from each other? And if so, what has been adopted on both sides?
Learning from each other for sure. What I really love from my role is that it's a global role. So I have this perspective, not just US and Canada, but also global instances where there's similarities, there's differences, there's successes, there's challenges. And I think that's something that every healthcare organization is really looking for. What can I learn from other jurisdictions that'll help me deliver better healthcare? We talk about how the private sector, and fundamentally healthcare in the US is very much private sector. And so there's agility to it, there's a more nimbleness to it, and because of that ability to introduce emerging technologies at a faster rate, it's almost a proving ground for other jurisdictions to be able to leverage. You look at the growth, I think it was one of the panels yesterday just on telemedicine, where pre-COVID it was around 15% of interactions were by telemedicine, and now it's ballooned to 85%. So that's been phenomenal progress that's happened because of these emerging technologies being introduced.
When it's minus 40 Celsius in Canada, telemedicine is the way to go. That's my
This is true.
Or 120 degrees in Phoenix, and you sweat just going from your car to the clinic. So, Mahesh, how do you approach the reuse of AI building blocks across industries, especially in compliance-heavy industries which you're working in?
Yeah, great. So at qBotica, we have industry cubes. and qubes and qBotica. So we create those structural patterns across these different industries, right? So we talked about, Kelly just mentioned about certain elements of how financial services work can be transferred to healthcare. And similarly, like, whether it's transportation, construction, supply chain, there are like several elements that you could actually, structural patterns that you can extract from each of those industries. We create those structural patterns, and those kind of like added with the data that's specific to that industry domain could actually produce good results. And those could actually act as a starter as well, right? So because, once some of these companies were never able to get off the blocks because they were like, where do I start? How do I make an impact, right? So having those accelerators, those frameworks across industries really helped us, qBotica, kind of really get into newer clients like, you mentioned Elevance Health, UN, Western Union, Prudential Insurance, some of our clients, right? So, all of these, there is a common pattern across how do I actually prioritize, how do I actually analyze, how do I actually take that into implementation, how do I scale, right? So there are various reuse patterns, not just from an implementation standpoint, but also about approaching the problems, identifying it, because that is critical when it comes to AI implementation. It's not about what tools to select, how do I implement. It's also about where do I find that opportunity, how do I find it, and taking that. I think both aspects needs to be looked into, and having these reuse accelerators that I talked about. Now we could actually use AI to find opportunities for AI. So that's the beauty, right? So now you could actually have AI agents deployed at the point of delivery, whether it's a service delivery over a phone or over in the internet, or it's happening in a site like maybe a food manufacturing industry. Like you could actually install cameras can actually now find, okay, when the meat is being cut, how is the the layers look like? Is it the whiteness versus the redness of the meat actually gives the indication of the cut, right? Think about it, right? So there are various ways in which AI could be implemented across, and we need to find out those structural patterns and then put them into an automation operating model, that's what we call it, and kind of really take that across these industries as qubes that we talked about.
And the thinking about I love for how excited you get and how lit up you get. And it's inspiring, right? Because we want people deploying AI and helping organizations who are excited about it, because the guardrails are there and they're real. And so in my previous company, scaling AI, we had to look at data privacy, not just in a country, but in a state, in a county, in a city, and using different types of models. So whether it was in computer vision, looking at the individual, or license plate reading, all sorts of things. There are barriers when it comes to data, when it comes to industry, when it comes to regulation. So it doesn't make it easy. The number of pilots that actually scale to production, the percentage is single digits. So when you're thinking about piloting AI technologies that you are hoping to scale, there's a very good chance you're going to meet with various ISVs before you choose one, and you're going to start to roll that pilot out in very small baby steps, which leads me to my last question. Kelly, what governance models are actually working for your clients to help them scale responsibly?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked about governance, because it's probably the most important thing to get right before you scale AI, and especially across functions, processes. And there's a lot of platforms out there. And while we in IBM have one called WatsonX.governance, there's lots of others. And the key is to pick a platform, processes, standards. It's so important to get this right, because, and those of you that work in the AI space know that it's not just about trust, transparency, traceability, but over time, models can drift. You've got to really understand what data was used. Has that data changed? Is is it biased in any way? And so having a platform in place that is, and you were talking about multiple models that'll run across models, because all the models will continue to kind of leapfrog, and I envision most companies, just like most companies use multiple clouds, will use multiple models over time, but having a shared governance platform, set of processes, standards is so, so important. We use our own technology internally, but we just encourage all of our clients, customers to get that right first, because otherwise, especially as we make this shift from generative AI, which is all about creation of content essentially, to agentic AI, which is enabling AI to make decisions, it makes that paramount, like really, really important to have governance in place that you feel confident, trusted, and of course, security is a key aspect of that. So it's just really taking the time to take a step back and say, okay, how are we going to govern this and be confident in the decisions that we're enabling AI to make on our behalf? And then last other thing I would say is that it's the human plus digital element that's so important. You're not just handing it off to agentic AI. There's this connectivity. It's almost like you're leading these digital workers the way you would lead other teams. And you have to think of it that way. The human still is responsible for the end-to-end process and the quality and the thoroughness and integrity of it.
And thank goodness, because the landscape changes almost on a daily basis. So we want to have humans. Ben, to you, working in healthcare, data privacy is a big piece. And how are your clients approaching data privacy and ethics in terms of scaling AI solutions?
Yeah, for sure. I think data privacy there's sort of two sides to the coin, especially within healthcare, because I think that from a privacy perspective, there's so many constraints that are in place that actually, stifle growth sometimes, unfortunately, because of the nature of the data that you're handling. So it's health information, it's personal health information for that matter. So there needs to be a heightened level of due diligence. But at the same time, I think that it's maturing so much that it's almost created these guardrails to help guide you along introducing it. So you're almost a leg up because of the fact that it's so defined that it helps you steer things a certain way. So it can work in both ways for sure. But at the same time, I think it's this, cup half full scenario where it's so constrained that it helps guide you in the implementation.
The cup half full. I love that. And we want those guardrails in place, and especially in healthcare. Mahesh, final question to you. What advice would you give with anyone in this audience who is thinking about implementing and scaling AI in terms of guardrails that they should be putting into place?
Yeah, I think in terms of how do I actually approach the problem, I would say rent the Ferrari, right? Don't try to build it. Okay, if you can, it's going to take you decades for you to build it, right? So, there are things out there we could actually leverage, trial them out, and these are inexpensive trials. There are companies like qBotica that offers obviously managed services that actually helps you do it in smaller chunks, and they come in, operate it, build it, for you, and then you could probably, if you want to do it yourself, we could do it later on. So I think that's important, right? I think we should not try. I think I've seen companies trying to kind of really take time and kind of really, hire very expensive resources, and then they try to get on that journey. But that is a 1960s, 70s, or 80s. It's not right now. I think it's a subscription economy, right? A gig economy. I think you could actually start small and quick and really go there. I think that's how I'd say from how do you actually get started. From a compliance and guardrails perspective, of course, right? It's important because now you are just taking the Ferrari example, right? So you're now actually sitting in a Ferrari and then driving through that with no brakes and no mirrors. If you are not, be careful, you're going to hit a lot of things on the way, right? So you have to be, measured in terms of, okay, where do I actually put the brakes in? Where do I, help? And I think that's where the experts and AI itself could actually, give you those opportunities, saying that, okay, these are things that, because the explainability is much better. Like you talked about traceability, explainability is important. when AI is doing something, look at the explainability aspects, right? So if you look at ChatGPT, you could actually ask it to explain what it did, where did it go, what information did it pick from where. That's important. So that will actually help you understand, how is it forming those opinions or coming to the conclusions and the outcomes, and that's we can help steer AI towards what we want to achieve rather than letting it off rails.
Thank you for that. So, audience, what you've heard today are experts in scaling AI, guardrail considerations, and what we want you to leave with is it's possible. By all means, you can ask questions of us out in the hall at the next break. And I would also say that as you're contemplating AI implementation, look at your board. And here's my advice to you. If you're using AI, I don't care if you're an organization, a municipality, or whatever you are now an AI company. Who on your board has scaled AI? Do you have an AI working committee? Do you have people from different parts of your organization on that committee? If the answer is no, that's where you start. Start there. And so my final words are, if you have a volleyball team and you need another person, Kelly is right here for you. If you have tickets to Monaco, talk to Ben. I'm sure he would love to be represented there in your booth. And lastly, if you want a pickleball partner to dominate, regardless if it's 120 degrees out, Mahesh is your person. So thank you all for being a great audience, and we're deeply appreciative.
All right. Thank you so much to Susan, Ben, Mahesh, and Kelly. That was a fascinating